Hello and back and welcome to World Talks on TVP World. I'm Nakalczyńska. No NATO membership for Ukraine now and forever. That's the initial demand of the Kremlin ahead of the second round of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine on Monday, June 2nd. Pressured by the US, President Donald Trump, the Kremlin finally accepted to present the draft peace memorandum in Turkey, but declined to do so in advance. As the decisive moment approaches, knife-edge diplomacy between both sides intensifies. We'll explore what's realistic, what's desirable for both parties with Wierenga, International Relations Institute, Baltic Defense College. Good morning, sir, and thank you for being with us here on TVP World this morning.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure.
So, what's desirable, we pretty much know. Problem is that's not entirely realistic, neither for Ukraine nor for Russia. So, at least for the time being. So, let's start with the ban on NATO membership as put forward by the Kremlin. How plausible it is that the delegations participating in the talks could accept Kremlin's requirement?
Well, I hope that there would be zero acceptance for that. I know that that is a demand, and if you look at what Putin has put on the table just a month or so before the second phase of the invasion against Ukraine, back in February 2022, they went to NATO with a list of demands, and those demands were not pick and choose. These are all of our demands. Otherwise, there's going to be war. And it's clear from those list of demands and other things that Putin has said that it's not simply just about Ukraine for him. He wants to completely reshuffle the European security architecture. And this is why most countries in the region, especially countries on NATO's eastern flank, are so strongly supportive of Ukraine, because they understand that this is about them as well as it being about Ukraine. And of course, the big demand from the Russians is that Ukraine will never join NATO. And there's some reluctancy from some countries in the alliance to allow Ukraine to join the alliance, but most European countries are on board with this happening because they do not want to have a reorchestrated security architecture in Europe that's beneficial to the Kremlin. There is arguably a reorchestrated mindset now for rearming Europe and for spending more on defense and being very prepared for a long-term Russian threat, both hybrid and potentially kinetic. But you know, with the United States, if you look back to the last NATO summit in Washington, the metaphor was a bridge to membership. So it wasn't said in Washington last July when, but the message was eventually yes. And now with the current administration, they're leaning towards no for part of the so-called peace talks, which aren't actually peace talks. They're just Russian playing games. So I think that there's now more of a mindset that, yes, we need to have Ukraine join the alliance because of how these peace talks, quote unquote, are going and proceeding.
Well, but your hope for the members of the negotiation tables not backing the Kremlin's standpoint on NATO membership for Ukraine doesn't exactly seem to be backed by U.S. officials' claims. Keith Kellogg stated quite clearly that Russia has a point fearing Eastern NATO expansion. So obviously, depending on how you want to read it, no NATO membership means basically for Ukraine that it renounces the sovereign right to decide about its future. So from a geopolitical standpoint, what would be the implications for the European security architecture should Ukraine have to concede on a NATO membership?
Well, there's a couple of points I would like to make there. Right now, Russia is not ready to encroach on NATO territory kinetically. But what they do want to do is try and poke holes and break up the unity of the alliance and the cohesion of the alliance, because of course NATO is consensus based. So right there, the Russian propaganda machine would have a field day saying, you see, NATO doesn't completely back Ukraine, even if it's only one or two member states, because we have to have this consensus based. So that is an unfortunate aspect of this. If Ukraine is not allowed to join NATO, then that is, I wouldn't say. Well, it will be a positive for Russia, and it'll be a very big negative for both the alliance and for Ukraine, because that means that Russia is allowed to dictate the fate of Ukraine, and this is something that President Zelensky and the Ukrainians have said will never happen. So this is an immovable object and an unstoppable force. Now, when it comes to the United States, there are people who try and the previous administration, their big thing was de-escalation. We don't want to escalate with the Russians. We don't want to lurch towards World War III or a nuclear war or anything. We don't want it to spill over into NATO territory. And with the current administration, they're taking a slightly different approach. It's more about getting the peace deal done. And now the Americans are losing patience with Putin because they see that this is just a charade. And the longer that it goes on, the more that the Russians can point to this as, a perceived American weakness and Russia calling the shots. So I do think that the Americans are getting ready to retaliate against Russia to push the button. But I think you could maybe read into General Kellogg's comments as one way to sort of maybe keep the peace talks going. I think if they were getting ready to change their mind on potential Ukrainian membership, that they wouldn't say it at this point in time. That's maybe more optimistic thinking. I think that probably the current administration is not going to be supportive, unfortunately, of Ukrainian membership at this point in time.
All right, so American, British, German and French security advisors are to take part in the upcoming peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. We learned that the delegations are set to hold separate meetings with the Russians and the Ukrainians. So why the negotiations have taken this format, and where is the European Union in it, and why is Poland absent?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, especially Poland, because out of the eastern flank countries, Poland has by far the largest military, and they are also becoming more and more of a political player in the region, both in the alliance and in the European Union. So it's strange to me that happened, and I think you could look at that maybe. It's kind of the, how should I say, the old guard still trying, still taking the lead in these initiatives, which is unfortunate because I think that Poland and the Baltic states should very much be present because they have a lot to say, and maybe the other countries there are worried that would be seen as provocative. But at this point in time, who cares? Because Russia is the one being provocative, not NATO countries, not Europe, not anyone but the Russians. So I think it's time that everybody comes to the table to solve this collectively. I think that we're moving into the right direction, and I think with France, the UK, and Germany, I think what's happened in a very short period of time since the current U.S. administration has formed is that the push and the desire by the United States for Europe to do more for their security has been met, and it's been met by several other member states. And it looks like it's going to be something that is long-lasting, not just in the short term because of the security environment. So I think that might have been a ploy when Europeans were cut out from the initial talks before to start of get the wheel moving a little bit quicker, because oftentimes these decisions take a long time, they're drawn out, and Europe was really quick to the draw to address the security concerns. So that's probably one of it, because if the U.S. line is going to be, hey, Europe, you are going to be responsible for your security, and pretty soon it's going to be primarily you are responsible. I think that's a good way. You can't just do that and then cut them out. You have to say, okay, well, let's give them a seat at the table. Let's make sure that they are actually discussing for their own security.
Yes, I would agree that it could be read as a sort of a provocation, but then what should we think about building up a bases up in the north, right at the border with Finland? So Finland should be implied as well, and perhaps also involved in these talks. But given the backdrop stalled of negotiations, what leverage do you see that Ukraine holds in respect of NATO membership? Do you think that there is anything to discuss here?
Well, to say that they have a battle-tested military is putting it lightly. I mean, they have a military that can really advise other militaries on how to fight the Russians, for example, broadly and more specifically. So, for example, drones, C2, a lot of things that, soft engagements. They really have a lot of knowledge that they can share, and they have people who have done it for years straight. So that's one thing. And I think that whenever this war is settled, and I guess a lot of it will depend on how it's settled, in the future, Ukraine will become an economic powerhouse because they have a lot of resources. They're changing with corruption, with how they conduct politics. I mean, and where they view themselves. I mean, they are fundamentally a Western country now. I mean, they are absolutely lost to Russia. So they are clearly in the Western bloc. So I think that they will be. Will have the economic, the political clout, and the military hardware and experience to really be a valuable and solid member, because nobody wants war, but you have to pray for peace and prepare for war. And if the inevitable happens, and they are an ally at one point in time, then they will have a lot to contribute to that fight, that potential fight.
Absolutely. So do you see any room for maneuver, for a potential compromise, maybe getting through neutrality models somehow? Some say North Korea, some say Finland or Austria before the Second World War.
Well, that's going to depend a lot on President Trump and Putin, I think, because there would be maybe a couple of member states in NATO that would not vote positively on accepting Ukraine, but it's consensus based, so it's not majority. I think if the U.S. were to say we support this, and if they were to really finally lose patience with the Kremlin, then you might maybe see that happen. There would be those that disagree with me and would say that the U.S. is never going to accept that, and that might be true. So then we get to your other question about a North Korean model or neutrality. I think that what the Russians would probably want, and what some in the current U.S. administration would want, would be a more North Korea type situation. But I think that with European diplomacy, and I actually see this working a little bit more positively than, let's say, back in February of this year with the U.S. and with Europeans. I think it's going better and a little bit smoother than things were back then. That actually the neutrality model might be applied, and if there are European peacekeeping forces there, but no American boots on the ground, I wouldn't say that would be acceptable for Putin, but it might be something he would be willing to stomach, especially if he had a guarantee that Ukraine would not be part of NATO. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, I mean, Putin's big thing is a reorchestrating of the security architecture in Europe, and he sees the U.S. behind all of this. So when he sees NATO, he sees the U.S. When he sees Ukraine, he sees the U.S. footprint there, et cetera, et cetera. And so none of these things would be stomachable for him. So then the other issue is that if he says no to all of these things and he doesn't budge, and the Americans and European allies are really trying to roll this along, they will lose more and more patience. And I think at some point in time, then we have to think about the possibility where people say, you know what, enough with the talk, enough with de-escalation. We should just do our own thing now, and they can accept it because we're sick and tired of it.
All right, so moderately optimistic, Luis Wierenga.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Tartu, Estonia, and International Relations Institute Baltic Defense College. Thank you once again, sir, for being with us and sharing your expertise with our viewers.
It was my pleasure. Have a good day.
Have a good day, and have a good day. Thank you so much for being with us this morning here on World Talks. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.